Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. I truly appreciate it and hope you're doing very well. I of course am continuing my ongoing mission to explore strange new humanoids. I think the humanoid cases are really important. There's so much we can learn from them. They're so interesting. And I have got 12 cases that I'm almost sure that you have not heard before. It's kind of the purpose of this episode is to just show how many cases there are. These cases do come from all over the world, all different types of ETs, all different types of evidence, some multiple witness cases. And today's episode is called I was in complete disbelief. 10 first-hand face-to-face encounters with aliens. These cases come from all over the world, including 2 cases from Brazil, 1 from Finland, and 9 from the United States, including Alabama, Connecticut, Michigan, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Ohio, Oklahoma, Texas, and Wisconsin. These cases reach all the way back to 1965 up to the current century, and I think you'll find that these cases show just how truly profoundly an encounter can affect a person, not only physically, but emotionally, spiritually, psychically, and really change the course of their life. So let's just get started. And the first case I'd like to talk about today is not well known. I call this one an alien artifact. It occurred on August 14, 1965 in Cruzeiro, Brazil. This one is super interesting to me because I think it shows one of the goals of ETs is basically trying to announce their presence. And it also shows how difficult it can be when a person gets a hold of an ET artifact. This case was first published in the issue number 54 of the Brazilian publication SBEDV. They heard of the case when it was published in the Jornal do Brasil newspaper, and it also appeared in other newspapers, and later in Charles Bowen's book, The Humanoids, and actually in several other books. The witness is Joao do Rio. His actual name is Joao de Oliveira. He's a factory railway stockroom worker for the Fábrica Nacional de Vagos. This is located in Cruzeiro in Sao Paolo, Brazil. According to the researchers of this case, Joao has a very good reputation in the area and is considered by those who know him to be a, quote, an honest, simple, and hardworking man. It was on August 7, 1965 that Joao was fishing along the nearby river Paraiba. As he was fishing, he felt a sudden cold wind behind him, and turning around, he saw a disc-shaped craft landing nearby. And from it emerged a small humanoid, or a little man, he said, which he described only as being about 70 centimeters in height, that's just over 2 feet, and having large luminous eyes. Now this humanoid approached Joao and spoke to him in his native language of Portuguese, speaking very clearly and saying that he was a crew member from the disc-shaped craft and that he was from another world. This humanoid then instructed Joao to tell everyone about the encounter. Joao argued with this humanoid, saying that nobody would believe him and that he would be ridiculed. Now it was at this point that the humanoid handed Joao a small fragment of metal and told him that this metal did not exist on Earth. So this was apparently proof for the witness. The figure then returned to the craft, which promptly took off. Joao obediently fulfilled the UFO occupant's request and shared his story publicly and actually handed over this alleged piece of metal to the laboratories of the factory where he worked. Now, according to the researchers from the SBEDV bulletin, they learned that in the days that followed, Brazilian Air Force officers showed up and interviewed Joao personally. They apparently showed a great interest in the case. 4 days later, this is interesting, another newspaper printed up a follow-up story saying that Joao had actually retracted his story and that this alleged piece of metal was in fact just an ordinary stone which his mother-in-law found beside some banana trees. Now, according to the SBEDV investigators, they write that Joao, quote, has been intensely intimidated after having spoken publicly about his contact experience. Furthermore, the whereabouts of this metal fragment and any information about its alleged analysis are missing. So we don't know what became of it. If this was just a stone, why can't we see it? Also in support of Joao's story is that several people working in a workshop near the factory report that for 3 days in a row, this was during the time of Joao's encounter, they observed a glowing object hovering not far from this same factory. According to these witnesses, this object appeared at 3 p.m. on each occasion and remained in view for a full 15 minutes before departing. So that's pretty good confirmation. Clearly, there's some controversy surrounding that case. According to the investigators, it looks like this guy was actually threatened and forced to recant his story. Hard to say for sure, of course, but I also find it interesting that there were sightings in that area at that time, which I think certainly lends an extra level of credibility to his case. And there's always another case. You can disregard one case or 10 or 20, but like I've said many times, there's always another case to take its place. And here's the next case I'd like to talk about, which I call They Want Me. This one occurred one evening in June of 1966 in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. This is a single witness case that apparently involves missing time and also apparently involves some government involvement. With this case, it took the witness a full 50 years to report what happened to him, a UFO encounter involving humanoids, missing time, and what appears to be a subsequent intimidating visit by government officials and a psychic aftermath that really changed his life forever. I call him Tyler, that's a pseudonym, he is anonymous. He was just a young kid. It was about 6:30 p.m. one evening around June in 1966. There was still daylight outside. It was Tyler's turn to take out the garbage after dinner. They had just had dinner in their home in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. So he grabbed the garbage and was walking to the side of the house, and this is when his life changed forever. I'll just quote Tyler directly. As he says, "I hear a static crackling noise and see and feel my hairs standing up. I look up and see a large craft, modern, long, dull, and shiny with a big front window. It's crackling, a weird vibration, humming, and there are 3 figures looking at me, pointing at me. I am scared stiff, unable to move. I know that they have come for me. They are pointing at me. They want me." So Tyler, now frightened, ran back into the house screaming, "I saw a UFO." At first, everybody in his family laughed at him, but seeing that he was serious and insistent, they finally went outside. Tyler was shocked to see that it was now dark outside. It had been light when he first saw this UFO. So apparently there was missing time, and of course now the UFO was gone. Tyler was still upset and insisted that his father call the police to report the incident, which his father did, and to their surprise they found out that other people in the area had also called into the station to report strange lights hovering over the nearby Watchung Mountains. It was later that night the phone rang, and his father answered it. A person on the other line informed Tyler's father that they would be receiving a visit tomorrow to discuss this sighting, and that they wanted to speak with Tyler directly. He had school the next day, so he was told to stay home. Tyler's father also stayed home from work. Tyler's brothers and siblings went to school, so it was just Tyler, his father, and his mother. Presently, a dark blue Air Force vehicle showed up at the house. It had numbers on the door. It looked quite official. 2 men got out and came into the house and interviewed Tyler alone about what he had seen. The men then talked privately with his parents, and finally they talked to Tyler and his parents together. And as Tyler says, "They tell us not to talk to anyone about this, that my life will be ruined if I report a UFO. Kids will tease me unmercifully for the rest of my life, and that what I saw was a weather balloon from the Air Force and not to talk about it anymore." So that sounds like a threat to me. The aftermath of the incident was also quite traumatic because for years after, Tyler said he was afraid to be outside alone in the dark, and he began having, quote, strange dreams of free flying around and seeing my house, out-of-body type experiences, the sensation of falling or dropping in my sleep. So these are all red flags that this was an on-board encounter, and given that there was missing time, I think there was more to this encounter than he remembers. At any rate, Tyler grew up, moved to Tampa, and then to Honduras. But even today, decades later, he says he continues to have strange dreams about this incident. And not only that, now his son is also reporting strange experiences. That case is truly fascinating to me. I've said it before, one person's simple sighting is another person's close-up encounter with humanoids, and in this case, a missing time encounter. It's pretty clear what happened here. It's also not the first case I've heard about. There are many like it, where people receive a visit from government officials following their encounter. This, I think, is significant because it just goes to show that explaining away encounters, as the government does, as a result of hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions, and mental illness is completely disingenuous. They're clearly taking this encounter quite seriously, and many others like it. Such a shame the way this subject has been mishandled, because the world would be a very different place. Now let's move to the next case, which is equally fascinating. This one's outside of the United States. I call this one 3 Glowing Humanoids. This occurred on December 14, 1972, in the very small town of Lohjala, Finland. To me, this is an interesting case because there are multiple witnesses and very unusual humanoids. And it's quite a long case in terms of how long this sighting went on. This multiple witness case comes from author and UFO researcher Heikki Virtanen of the Finland UFO Research Organization. It was 2:30 a.m. as Veikko Kivioja, a farmer, was returning to his home in Lohjala village in Honkajoki. This is in Finland. He had just visited his neighbor Seppo Oja. He had driven about 1 mile along a winding forest road, a remote area, and coming around a corner, this is when he noticed what looked like 3 bright lights on the left side of the road. Thinking it was another car, he came to a stop. The lights were now a little closer, and Veikko could now see that these little lights were actually 3 humanoid figures, glowing intensely with white light. They were heading across the road in front of him towards a clearing on the side of the road that had been recently cleared by logging. Now Veikko was close enough to get a pretty good look at these figures. He said that they had round heads, but that their facial features were not visible. He could see what he described as wing-like arms resting on their hips. He said they had legs and walked softly and easily. Really astonished at what he was seeing, he decided to return to his friend Seppo's home and get him to witness the strange beings also. To turn around, he had to drive slightly ahead, and as he turned, his headlights shone directly on the creatures. Strangely, they seemed to pay no attention to him whatsoever. He could hear no sound coming from them at all. So he turned around, drove up to his friend's house, and honked the car horn. His friend Seppo woke up, and Veikko quickly told him about the strange creatures. Now his friend was initially skeptical, but could see that Veikko was very serious, so he agreed to follow. And they soon reached the spot where he had seen these humanoids, and both men were amazed to see that these strange creatures were still there. By this point they had left the road and were now walking towards a small hill about 100 meters away, but both men could see that these figures were surrounded by this bright glowing light, bright enough to illuminate the trees around them. And they watched them for about 10 minutes, at which point the glow faded away. The men then went outside to check for evidence, but were unable to find anything unusual. However, events weren't over yet, because it was just about 5 hours later that a dairy worker by the name of Haimo Mattila was driving his tractor on another road about 10 kilometers away from where Veikko and Seppo had seen the humanoids. It's about 6 miles. Suddenly the man saw a very bright light coming from the right side of the road about 100 meters away, and as he got close, he saw that it was a bright green object, about 2 meters, 6 feet in diameter, and flying about 3 feet or 1 meter above the ground. He says it was moving very slowly, at almost a walking pace, but was easily evading all the obstacles in its way, so it was clearly controlled. Now, realizing that this glowing object was going to reach the road right about the same time he was, the witness drove his tractor faster, as fast as he could, and he managed to pass the object just before it flew over the road behind him. And looking in his mirror, he could see the object cross the road and go off into the trees. I'm always very curious what these alleged ETs or humanoids are doing in these locations at that time. Hard to say. There's apparently not a whole lot going on in terms of technology in this area, so we don't know. But what's fascinating to me about this case is that there was initially a single witness, and he did the right thing. He quickly got another witness who confirmed his story, and unknown to either of them, there was a third witness. When we have this many witnesses, it's hard to discredit a case as a result of perhaps a hoax or hallucination or misperception or anything like that. There are so many cases like these going on all over the world. And here's another one. This one is also really not at all well known. I call this one the alien on Hampton Beach. This occurred on May 20, 1974 on Hampton Beach in New Hampshire. This is a single witness case and there is some controversy surrounding it, but it's super interesting because this does involve a landing, a humanoid, apparent landing traces, and a quite unusual humanoid as well. This case comes from researcher John Paul Oswald, who was a researcher not only for the Mutual UFO Network, but also for the National Investigative Committee of Aerial Phenomenon. And he calls it, quote, an interesting report of a midnight landing of a UFO with an occupant seen to egress from the craft. The witness is anonymous and known only as Mr. P. He's 32 years old, and the researcher John Oswald describes him as, quote, a good worker, cheerful, likable, and a serious Christian, but also, quote, simple-minded. It was midnight on May 20, 1974, and Mr. P had decided to go swimming at Hampton Beach. This is just north of the spot where the Hampton River flows into the Atlantic Ocean. This is again in New Hampshire. And while there, Mr. P noticed a disc-shaped object flying in a horizontal path over the ocean, quickly arrived at the beach, stopped and hovered, and then descended vertically onto the beach. The landing spot was just below the tide line at low tide, so right there at the edge of the water. He said it had lights on it and 4 landing legs with what looked like pads on the end. He was close enough to it to hear a, quote, pulsing hum, combined with sort of an electrical motor sound coming from the craft. He was also close enough that he could actually feel heat emanating from this craft. So he was some distance from it when at 12:30 a.m. a hinged opening appeared on the underside of the craft, and he says a 6-foot-tall humanoid emerged. He said it was wearing a bulky-looking one-piece jumpsuit, and Mr. P noticed that there were 2 hoses running from the suit, one emerging near the jawline of the being and the other running down the back. This sounds like a breathing device of some kind. The figure stepped out onto the sand only briefly, and then almost immediately returned inside the craft through this opening, which immediately closed. The craft then proceeded to lift up vertically and then flew horizontally back over the ocean from whence it came. Once it was out of sight, Mr. P walked over to where it had landed and using a flashlight saw that there were 4 marks in the sand, apparently from these landing pads, and what looked to him like a rose-colored kind of liquidy paste inside them. When he went back to the site the next morning, these landing marks had been washed away in the high tide. Now of interest is that at that time, just 1.8 miles directly to the west of this landing site, a nuclear power station was in the initial stages of construction. It is now there. It is known as the Next Era Energy Seabrook Station. Mr. P did report this sighting the very next day to his employer, and it was his employer who contacted researcher John Paul Oswald. And after interviewing the witness, The researcher was convinced that someone of Mr. P's mental facilities was not capable of fabricating such a detailed UFO report. The researcher, John Oswald, also learned that Mr. P said that this was his second sighting, and that he had earlier seen a chalk-white UFO land on an isolated beach at Lake Champlain near Burlington, Vermont. So he could be a repeat witness or perhaps a contactee. In defense of his case, Mr. P did agree to take a lie detector test, though this was apparently never done. And in fact, later, researcher John Oswald found out that Mr. P's employer did cast some doubt on Mr. P's character and reliability when Mr. P confessed to having lied about some missing funds at his place of employment. Nevertheless, Oswald says that Mr. P's case, quote, remains of interest because of a small flap that was taking place in this area at that time. In fact, there were 6 other cases between April 8 and June 18 of that same year, including sightings of anomalous lights and solid craft and at least one possible landing, all of which adds credibility to Mr. P's report. It's the kind of case that is quite frustrating because here we have what looks to be really good landing trace evidence, but unfortunately it was not photographed or tested in any way. And yes, there's controversy surrounding this particular witness, but given that he did agree to take a lie detector test, I think lends some level of credibility to his testimony. And again, this case was professionally investigated by an experienced researcher, which I think also raises the bar a little bit there. A very interesting case all around. Makes me wonder how many people see these things, are corroborating witnesses, but don't come forward. Because as we see, it often takes people quite some time to come forward and share their experiences. Now let's move to the next case. This one fits that profile where it takes the witnesses quite some time to come forward. Totally understandable in today's hostile climate surrounding this subject. I call this next case, A Gray Took Me Away. This occurred one evening in May of 1975 in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. This is a really interesting case because it starts out with multiple witnesses and a simple sighting. Simple sighting often is the precursor to a much closer encounter, and that's what happened in this case, which apparently involves missing time. It was a beautiful sunny day as 4 siblings were hanging out in the front yard of their home in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They were just enjoying the weather, playing, and talking with each other when they all 4 noticed, quote, a grayish-silver disc-shaped object in the sky. It was quite high up there, but it was big enough to see that it had windows all around the perimeter, and they all thought it was strange because none of them had ever seen anything quite like this. But it was really its odd behavior that left an impression, at least on one of the sisters. I'll call her Lila, that's a pseudonym. At the time of the encounter, she was in high school, and as Lila says, the strangest thing about the object was that every time I would jump from one side to the other, goofing off as young people sometimes do, the object would do the same thing in the sky. Awkward enough, we felt we were being watched, so we went in our house. And that was the end of the sighting, and as the evening arrived, the UFO sighting had been pretty much forgotten, and Lila and her sister went to bed. They shared the front bedroom, and they were talking to each other before falling asleep when they suddenly heard what sounded to them like horse hooves galloping fast and loud alongside their house and then abruptly stopping right at their window. So looking up at the window, they were shocked to see bright lights revolving and flashing through their heavy curtains. And as Lila says, we were so scared that we covered our heads up with our blanket. The next thing I knew, someone was whispering my name over and over until I peeked out from under my blanket. I saw a gray, 3-foot-tall male being with flaky skin, big grayish-black eyes, barely taller than my bed, saying my first name through telepathy. It sounded like a boy's voice. His head was big, like an egg shape. He had pinholes for a nose and mouth, no ears, no genitals. I don't know where he took me. It seems like I saw some others, but I don't know. I can't remember right now. I wish I could. He took me away and brought me back. Early the next morning, My sister asked me where I was all night, but I was in a daze and still not sure. So that day was a school day and they went to school. And that afternoon, while walking back home to the school bus stop, Lila saw some army men and a couple of other men in black suits and a big fancy black car. They were all pulled off at the side of the road, and the army men were picking up what looked to Lila like, quote, purple bones. I don't know what that means, but she says they were throwing them in their army truck. Lila stared at the men in black, but they stared right back at her and frowned until she stopped watching them. And she says the whole encounter affected her profoundly. As Lila says, both my sister and I wondered where I was all night. She was in the same bed. We were awake and covered our heads in fear of what was happening. I have never been the same. I want to be hypnotized to find out what happened to me. A very close encounter, and there's that pattern of a sighting occurring first, followed by a very close humanoid encounter. And I've said this before, one of the most common places to see a humanoid is in your own bedroom, which is really amazing when you think about it, and how many cases there must be out there which we never hear about because the witnesses are simply too afraid to come forward. So I'm really glad this witness did, and it does sound like she had missing time. And not only is it her saying this, but her own sister apparently verifies this. So that makes this, I think, a pretty credible case. And I don't know whether she was taken on board. I suspect she was. So it would be very interesting to follow up on these cases. This is one of the problems with research. There's so much difficulty following up on these cases because witnesses are so afraid to come forward. People who come forward are often gaslit, they're ridiculed, they're disbelieved, their own family even kind of pushes back on these cases. So I totally understand why it takes people so long to come forward. Now let's move to the next case. This one is really unusual. I call this one, It Had No Face. This one occurred one evening on January 11, 1976, in a rural area of Hamden, Connecticut. This is a multiple witness case. It does involve children. Children comprise a pretty large number of UFO and humanoid witnesses for one simple reason. They're outside a lot more often than perhaps adults are. They're out there playing, exploring, and this is why I think we see so many witnesses who are young children. This case comes from researcher James P. Barrett, who was an investigator for the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, APRO. It was just before 6 p.m., January 11, 1976, when 14-year-old Bobby F. was walking through falling snow on his way to his friend's house in Hamden, Connecticut. To his amazement, he saw a large glowing figure floating near some sumac bushes about 400 feet away from him. He could really only see the figure from the waist up. It appeared to be mostly in profile, but he was close enough to notice that it had no discernible face. The back of its head, he said, looked really unusual, almost flat and corrugated or grooved. The head of the figure was glowing so brightly that it extended about 7 to 8 feet high and 9 feet around, and a less luminous silvery outer glow extended about 9 feet beyond that. So this amazed Bobby, and he ran as fast as he could through the snow to his friend's house. He was immediately joined by his two friends, Glenn H., age 13, and Jerry H., age 16. Glenn brought a flashlight, and Jerry grabbed his .22 rifle. Together the three boys returned to the site, and the strange figure was still there. Glenn shone the beam of his flashlight on the figure, and as he did so, this figure appeared to fall backwards, kind of behind a little ridge there. All three agreed that this figure had no visible facial features, no neck, and no apparent arms. Glenn then shone the flashlight in another direction, and immediately the figure rose up again. Glenn shone the light on it again, and the figure remained in view of the flashlight beam for about 3 or 4 seconds, and then again ducked behind this ridge. Now when the figure came up for a third time, Jerry aimed his rifle and fired 2 shots over the head. The creature then descended for the third time and was no longer seen after that. Now, Jerry told researchers that when he shot at this being, he was unable to see it, but apparently the other two boys were still looking at it. That is a very unusual humanoid, but I have to say that reports of glowing humanoids are not rare. It's actually quite common. But I wonder about it. What is making them glow? Where is this light coming from? If we were to see these guys more close up, would this be a gray, a human-looking ET? Really hard to say for sure, because all the witnesses saw was this very bright, glowing entity of some kind. Also interesting is that one of the kids actually tried to shoot at this ET, well, not at it, but above it, and that certainly seemed to end the encounter, which is no surprise. Now let's move to the next case. I call this one the Leaping Alien. This one occurred on October 15, 1977 in a rural area of Midland, Michigan. This is a multiple witness case. This one, again, is not well known at all. What's to me the most interesting aspect of this case is how this ET was moving. Again, this case comes from Walt Andrus, co-founder and head of the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. He says he received a letter directly from the witnesses describing their very unusual experience with a strange humanoid. The witnesses are Mrs. Foster and her daughter Lori. It was around 5:30 p.m. on October 15, 1977. Lori was driving and her mother was in the front seat. They had left their home for a shopping trip and were heading north on South Patterson Road and were approaching this T intersection of East Pine River Road in Midland, Michigan. You can see the exact location here. And this is when, without warning, a strange being leaped out from the right side of the road, moving in an arc about 4 feet high, and landed smack dab in the middle of the road, just about 200 feet ahead of them. Lori immediately slammed on the brakes, and both witnesses could now see that this figure was in fact humanoid in shape. It stood upright, was very slender. The head, neck, and torso appeared to be of normal human proportions, but were about the size and build of a slender teenage boy. They said it was a smooth, dull black color from head to foot, and if the figure had any arms, they were not clearly visible to either of the women. No sooner had the figure landed in the center of the road when it immediately rebounded into the air and in a second leap disappeared into the underbrush on the left side of the road. The way it jumped, they said, was very similar to a kangaroo in the large jumps that it executed. They estimated that each leap measured about 30 feet. Now Lori drove ahead to stop where they had seen this land. Both the witnesses then looked around, could see no sign of the humanoid, and both were too frightened to get out and look for it. Now neither of them saw any UFO, but per Walt Andrus the previous year, there had been a series of sightings in that area. That case is a perfect example of how 60 seconds can change your life forever. These two witnesses saw something very briefly, but they're not able to explain it. This appears to be a gray alien, hard to say for sure, but now they have become not only believers, they know. They've had a first-hand encounter, so that's experiential knowledge. That is absolute proof to the witnesses. They may not have gotten a photograph, but you certainly can't explain that away to them because they were there. That case was investigated by Walt Andrus, who's one of the founders of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. So I think it's a very serious case, and I think there's so many other cases like this. I really wonder what that ET was doing, leaping across the road like that. Was there another UFO in the area? There very possibly was other witnesses, but again, most witnesses are afraid to come forward. This is one of the really difficult things about UFO research, because this cover-up has really done a number on all humanity. Such a shame. Now let's move to the next case, which I call a thirsty UFO. This one occurred on the evening of March 23rd, 1978 in Sao Paolo, Brazil. This is a single witness case, but it's super interesting because there are a lot of cases of UFOs that seem to show an interest in the water on our planet, And that's what it looks like is happening in this case. It's also really interesting how these ETs behaved and the instruments they were using. There's a lot of really bizarre and interesting details in this particular case. This case was published in the Brazilian magazine Revista. It was at 6 p.m. on the evening of March 23, 1978, that Joao Inácio Ribeiro, then age 47, was walking along the beach near Guaíba, Sao Paolo, Brazil. Looking up, he saw a 30-foot wide circular craft appear on the horizon. It immediately zoomed forward, stopped, and hovered motionless about 250 feet from shore and just above the surface of the water. He said it had the appearance of a shiny metallic sphere. It was covered with blue, red, green, and lilac-colored lights. He said there was a dome on top and 3 circular windows. Although the object was directly above the water, it produced no agitation in the water. Joao became frightened, and this is when he saw 2 3-foot-tall humanoids emerge and stand right on top of this object. And as Joao says, the creatures were short, about a meter tall, wearing tight-fitting grayish clothing. Besides being bald, they had small mouths and noses, and protruding eyes disproportionate to the size of their faces. One of them carried a kind of stick, while the other held a cable and a black box resembling a vacuum cleaner. For the next 10 minutes, the crew of this craft repeatedly guided the craft over the seawater, apparently using this instrument to get seawater from the ocean, though the witness did not state this explicitly. So after about 10 minutes had elapsed, the figures took their equipment and re-entered the craft. The UFO then ascended to about 30 feet above the surface of the ocean and promptly plunged into it without producing any turbulence, no foam, no waves, though Joao says he did hear a hissing sound. Frightened, Joao fled the scene and shared his encounter with his family and was later interviewed by researchers explaining what happened. And he told them that he was convinced the craft that he saw was not from this world. This case was misreported in some of the accounts, which said that there was a lot of turbulence in the water, but according to the first-hand eyewitness testimony, no, the water was never disturbed at any time. Very hard to say for sure whether that UFO and these little ETs were taking ocean water or not, but it certainly looks like it. And there's so many cases of that actually taking place, so I suspect that was probably the purpose of this encounter. But can you imagine watching something like that for 10 full minutes? It's one thing to have a fleeting sighting of an encounter, but when you're that close to a metallic craft and the ETs are balanced there on top of it, I mean, how bizarre is that? That's the sort of incident that is just not easily explained away. Now let's move to the next encounter. I call this one Humanoid Encounter on River Styx Road. This occurred one evening in May 1982 in Chatham, Ohio. This is a multiple witness case, but what's super interesting is the witnesses, while they agree on most details, one witness remembers a little bit more than the other, and there was apparently missing time. The witness to this case reported this encounter about 33 years after it occurred. It does involve 2 witnesses, though only one of them has gone public. I'll call him Andrew, but this is of course a pseudonym. Andrew and some family members were visiting his friend's farm in Chatham, Ohio. They were having a picnic, and that evening, after cleaning up, they headed home. It was around 7 p.m. on a clear night in May 1982, and they were driving southeast on River Styx Road, which you can see here. It's a small country road. Andrew was driving, and his friend was in the front passenger seat. And it was then that a UFO showed up. As Andrew says, "We had the sunroof open, and we both noticed a real bright light in front of us behind the only cloud in the sky. There was supposed to be a full moon, or near full, that night, so right away we thought it was the moon rising from behind the cloud. But then we looked a little to the right, and there was the moon. So then we thought it was a plane's headlight as it was coming up. But then we realized it was hovering, so we thought it was a spotlight from a helicopter. So Andrew is describing what J. Allen Hynek, UFO researcher, calls, quote, theory escalation. This is when witnesses go through various explanations to account for their observations, but are forced to discard them as it becomes more clear to them that they are observing something truly unusual. Now, it was at this point that the witnesses stopped the car. Andrew's friend got out, he walked over to the driver's side, and together they began to discuss what they were looking at. And this is when the object made a real rapid movement, and in literally the blink of an eye, was hovering above some nearby trees. They discussed whether it was a large object somewhat far away or a smaller object up close. Apparently it was pretty close, because Andrew could now discern that this was in fact a structured craft. As he says, I saw a silvery craft that looked like two saucers put together at the rims with a gap where the rims join to make room for a row of windows. There were white lights and red lights on the top and bottom of the craft. Some were stationary, and some lights were moving or blinking. I saw entities in the window. I saw 3 people standing at the windows. They had big heads and long arms, but it was not close enough to see details like faces. Then, the craft in the blink of an eye zipped to the right and hovered for seconds or a minute, and then zipped back to where it was. Then zipped northeast in the blink of an eye and was gone. So at this point, Andrew turned to his friend and said, Did you see what I saw? Andrew's friend said yes, and they discussed it and they agreed with all the details except one. Later, his friend did not recall seeing any humanoids. Now more weirdness was yet to come. This whole encounter lasted, they estimate, about 10 to 15 minutes. But when they got home, they learned that they were about 45 minutes late. So they were missing at least a half an hour, possibly more. As Andrew says, for several days we could hardly believe it happened, but seeing it together made it real. This was my one and only UFO experience. I did not tell anyone for many years. In the mid-1990s, when I did tell some people, I was ridiculed, and I realized it would adversely affect my credibility, so I hardly told anyone else until now. In fact, it was only after seeing a show about UFOs and hearing that the other witnesses were afraid to come forth because of ridicule, Andrew decided that it was the right thing to do, to come forward. And as he says, what spurred me on was that the show said maybe someone else saw something that night. Such a fascinating case. Would really love to talk to that other witness, given that he had other encounters. I suspect that he may be a contactee. It certainly sounds like they were taken on board, given that they are missing 45 minutes of time. That's a huge red flag. What's also a red flag is that one of the witnesses has no memory of seeing humanoids. When we hear something like that, that is another indication that there's more to the encounter than the witnesses can remember. Love to talk to them. I bet they had dreams about this encounter, and I bet that there's a lot more to unpack about what's going on. It's interesting to me that this occurred along the River Styx Road. I don't know, it's an unusual name for a road. Not that there's any connection to UFOs, but I just found it kind of interesting. All right, let's move to the next case. Again, quite brief in details, but super interesting. There's a detail in this case that really struck me profoundly. I call this case, It Was Comforting Me. It is a quote from the witness. This one occurred one evening in July of 1994 in Verona, Wisconsin. And what's to me so interesting about this case is that it was entirely benevolent. This could be another case of missing time as well, because the witness doesn't remember the entirety of the encounter. She was quite young at the time. But a fascinating description of a humanoid. The witness in this case was only 4 or 5 years old when she had her encounter with an apparent humanoid. She is anonymous, so I'll call her Rebecca. She's unsure of the exact date, but has pinned it down to late July 1994. Her family had left their home in Arkansas to visit their relatives in Verona, Wisconsin. They drove all day and arrived at evening time, Rebecca was tired from the trip, so she was placed in a papasan chair in the guest room. This chair was about 5 feet away from a window, and at some point in the night, Rebecca awoke. As she says, "It seemed very quiet and dark. I remember feeling scared at first as I woke up, and when I looked at the window, I saw light coming from it. There, right at the window, was an entity with its hands on the windowsill, staring directly at me. As soon as I looked at its face, I immediately felt calm, unafraid, and actually curious. It, too, looked at me." Now, the first thing Rebecca noticed about this being was that it was glowing with intensely bright white light, which she described as being like the flash on a camera, but a little different. As she says, "That's what the light on its body looked like, a white light, but also around its body was this golden aura, almost metallic looking. It seemed to tilt its head sideways slightly. I remember its eyes were small, black, but it seemed to have a reassuring look. I felt like everything was going to be okay. It was like it was comforting me somehow. And then, after that, I must have lost consciousness." So that's all she remembered except waking up the next morning. And it was years later, hearing about alien encounters, that Rebecca started to do some research looking at other people's descriptions of ETs, but she was unable to find any descriptions that matched hers. So it was an experience that left her with more questions than answers. As Rebecca says, "It was an odd atmosphere in the room for sure. I cannot explain it. From what I could tell, though, it seemed to observe children as if it was guarding me or protecting me from something. That's how I perceive it." To me, the most interesting aspect of that case is how this witness felt like this ET was protecting her or guarding her, and that it was completely benevolent. It's also really interesting that here we have another case of a humanoid that's glowing really brightly, and apparently not a typical gray, but sounds like a variation of a gray to me. Doesn't surprise me. The variation among grays is the same sort of thing we see here on our own planet with the variation among human beings. So there appears to be a very wide variety of humanoids. And in fact, as we go through all of these cases, you can see that it's almost as if there's an endless parade of different humanoid types out there. As this next case shows, I call this next one, "I felt inexplicably happy." This one occurred one evening in autumn of 2011 in an undisclosed location in Alabama. This is a single witness case, but another example of an ET showing up in a person's home. What's to me the most interesting aspect of this case is how the witness reacted. At the time of her encounter, Elaine, that is a pseudonym, was living with her mother in an unnamed town in Alabama. One evening in the fall of 2011, she fell asleep on the couch in the living room. She said it was around 3:30 or 4 a.m. that something startled her awake. I'll just quote her directly. As Elaine says, "I looked up and an entity was standing over me. He, she, or it appeared to be between 5 to 6 feet tall, white skin, and the usual large black eyes. The eyes were shiny, deep, and about 3 inches across, and angular. The entity was thin, with a larger head. It appeared to be wearing some sort of stretchy suit, but I was too focused on the face to really notice much else. I did notice that the hands were long, as if they had an extra joint in each finger, with dark-colored nails. I never had an experience like that before, but I wasn't even remotely afraid. Actually, and I feel like an idiot thinking back on it, I had this uncontrollable urge to laugh. I felt inexplicably happy and just laughed. The entity bent down as if to observe me. The movement was unusual and fluid in a way. I had the impression of curiosity. Then the entity was just gone. Now Elaine explains that this entity didn't disappear. Instead, it looked to her more as though it had, quote, rolled into a different plane. Now Elaine was still laughing, and her mother, who was just beginning to get ready for work, heard Elaine laughing and came into the room and asked her, "Why are you awake? And what is so funny?" Elaine says that she was laughing uncontrollably. She was laughing so hard she could only talk gibberish. So her mom just assumed that she must be sleep talking. But Elaine maintains that this was a real experience. Now this is interesting because by coincidence or synchronicity, this turned out to be a very auspicious time for her encounter. As Elaine says, I observed an entity in my home and my life hasn't been the same since that night, and I joined the Air Force that same week. Most people, when they wake up and they see what appears to be a tall gray alien leaning over and staring at them, react with fear. It's so interesting to me that this witness reacted in the opposite way, with sort of this feeling of being inexplicably happy. Some people might say that this was a feeling sort of put upon the witness by the ET itself. Hard to say for sure, but we certainly do see a lot of cases of people feeling no fear, and the ET telling them, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you, and this sort of thing. But for her to react by laughing is really interesting. I also find it super fascinating that that week she joined the Air Force, because we do see a number of cases of people having a really profound encounter at a pivotal point in their lives, whether it's getting a new job or getting a new home or becoming married or getting separated or going through an illness or something along those lines. That is a really interesting and unusual pattern that I don't think a lot of people know about, but it absolutely turns up quite a bit. Now let's move to the last and final case in this collection. Also a really fascinating case. I call this one, I was in complete disbelief. This occurred one evening in July of 2019 in an undisclosed location in Texas. This is a single witness case, although the lady did have a husband sleeping next to her at the time. This is a really unusual case in that the witness not only experienced some physiological effects, but it really affected her profoundly in other ways, as we'll see. The witness in this case, I call her Anne, that's a pseudonym. She anonymously reported her experience of being visited by a gray alien, writing, "It took me many years to be able to discuss this occurrence with anyone, because I'm extremely well known for being a level-headed mentor and healer." She decided to share her encounter for one main reason. As she says, "My goal is just to contribute my experience with others that have had the same happen to them." She says it was around 9:30 p.m. one evening in July 2019, and she was lying in bed with her husband in their home in an undisclosed location in Texas. Her husband was asleep, but Anne was still awake. And as she says, "I was lying in bed when my body was completely paralyzed. I could not move, but I was wide awake, and all I could do was blink my eyes. My hearing became extremely sensitive. The window that was beside me had curtains that covered the window from ceiling to the floor, and it was as if the wind blew and the curtains moved. I was able to see through the corner of my eyes a tall, gray being. I was extremely terrified. Being a Reiki master, I started protecting my body and projecting positive energy, because I was not sure what was about to happen. This thing stood about 6.5 to 7 feet tall. It was a gray. I could smell a sulfur kind of smell. It bent over and was looking at me while I was protecting myself with Reiki energy. So unable to turn her head to look directly at the being, Anne instead swiveled her eyes to the mirror, and she was now able to get a complete view of the gray alien standing beside her in the reflection of the mirror. And as Anne says, its body and the arms and legs were extremely thin and long. Its neck was long, and its head was not proportionally correct to the body. I did not see eyelids on the eyes. The shape of the eyes was extremely odd. It did not have a normal nose. It had a mouth, but it did not have lips. Now she did have the distinct impression that this being was studying her in some way. As Anne says, it was as if it was sensing what I was doing. It appeared to be curious. But what was extremely odd, this thing gave off an energy as if it was familiar to me. I tried everything that I could, every bit of energy, just to move one finger, to tap my husband on the forehead for him to wake up and look directly at this thing. My dogs were lying on the floor and were whimpering. There was a sense of calm that came over me, and instantly my racing thoughts and fears started to subside. It did not touch me at all. All it did was bend over and look directly at me and up and down my body. It seemed like an eternity that this thing had me in a paralyzed state while it was observing me. Right before it left, it brushed up against the curtains, and I could hear the subtle sound of the curtain being disturbed. The thing moved the curtain and stepped backwards through the window and left. I was able to move my fingers and then my arms, and I woke up my husband telling him what had happened. My husband had been in an incredibly deep sleep, which is not normal for him. So at this point, Anne looked at the clock and saw that about 7 minutes had elapsed. She knew that the experience could not have been a dream because she was never asleep. She was fully awake before the incident, throughout the encounter, and afterwards. And in addition, there were other effects from the encounter that confirmed the reality of the event. As Anne says, both of the dogs had wet themselves. I was in complete disbelief at what just happened. The following days after this occurrence, I had sleep issues, aching in my joints, stomach issues, and borderline anxiety. Anne reported her encounter in 2022, about 3 years after it occurred. That's a pretty recent case, 2019. It took the witness only 3 years to come forward, so kudos to the witness for having the courage to step forth and share her encounter. Super interesting to me that she is a Reiki master. Seems to be quite a few cases of doctors and nurses and healers of all kinds being visited. Also interesting is how she felt that the presence of this ET was somehow familiar to her or giving off the same sort of energy. I suspect, and this is just my personal opinion, that it was her abilities to do Reiki healing that may have attracted this ET to her, because there are so many cases of people who've had encounters and then suddenly start doing Reiki or hands-on healing or becoming interested in medicine or that kind of thing. But it's a concerning case. I mean, no doubt this affected her physically, negatively, and also it was very difficult for her to process. My heart goes out to all people who go through these kinds of experiences, because I know, having done this research for so many years, that it can be very scary and very difficult to process an experience like this. So there you go. 12 cases I'm pretty sure you haven't heard before, coming from all over the world of all different types of humanoids. Not sure how many cases it's going to take for this subject to be fully accepted by all humanity. I don't think we're there yet. Until and unless this cover-up ends, I think we're going to continue to struggle with fear, confusion, skepticism, disbelief, ridicule, and gaslighting. And it's such a shame, because we know now that our governments do take this subject very seriously. And by our governments, I'm talking about the military-industrial complex, the various highest levels of the military, the perhaps Illuminati, cabal, one percenters, call them what you will, the intelligence agencies. They know it's real. This is a subject that is of profound importance to all humanity, and we all deserve to know the truth about it. That's why I am continuing this mission to get this information out there, because we all deserve to know the truth. That's it for today. Thank you guys so much. I truly appreciate you guys watching. Hope you're having a great weekend or week, whatever the case may be. Until next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. Most important of all, keep having fun. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.